Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining the webinar on competitive advantage, or for those from South Australia, competitive advantage. I'm Grant Davidson. I'm the founder and managing director and head of strategy at Davidson Branding. And for those not familiar perhaps with Davidson Branding, we're a leading strategic branding agency focused on driving growth for businesses, and competitive strategy is one of the key drivers that we use. It's a topic I absolutely love, so I am looking forward to sharing it with you. So as quick background, I had the great fortune to study sustainable competitive advantage at Harvard Business School around 8 years ago. Sounds like a bit of name dropping, but I was also fortunate to be taught by Michael Porter himself, who is the founder of competitive strategy and renowned as one of the most influential thinkers in competitive strategy. So a mind-blowing experience. There's a little bit of Where's Wally? And look, I've used these tools and teachings with at least 100 businesses over the years to develop a competitive advantage and drive that profitable and sustainable growth. One of those great success stories, they managed to 10 times their business within a 12-month period. And that was a phenomenal outcome, which is great. So I'm going to share my favourite bits of competitive strategy with you over the next 30 minutes. And do pop questions into the questions section as we go. At the end, I'll cover off any of those questions in the Q&A session. Okay, so I thought I'd start with the reason why competitive advantage is more important than it's ever been before, particularly for business in the next 5 years to 10 years. We are, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but we are about to be hit by a perfect storm of competition in Australia. And a number of these factors have been fueled by the pandemic. That's the old gift that keeps giving. First thing is, we found that last year, or in the last 12 months, there have been a record number of new businesses. And that was 15% up on the previous year. So more businesses than we've ever seen in Australia. We've also seen a record number of patent applications, meaning that businesses are driving growth through new product development and R&D. The other thing we've seen across almost every business that I work with is companies are chasing lost growth, making up for lost time. I mean, business owners, business leaders, managers, one thing I think we hate more than anything is standing still, if not going backwards. So we're all now absolutely, I won't say desperately, but chasing growth to make up for lost time. So in the environment, there's lots of competition from a number of businesses, focus on R&D and focus on driving growth. And from the audience that we're, from the consumer group, from the target audience, there is a record growth in online shopping, meaning that literally as consumers, as shoppers, we have an unprecedented number of options that we can choose from. And the absolute sucker punch, or the icing on the cake, is an uncertain and volatile economy, which is leading to consumers and customers tightening up their belts, so weakening consumer confidence. So in terms of a competitive environment, we're competing with more businesses than ever before, chasing new product development, chasing growth, customers who have more choice than ever before and are tightening up their belts. So these are things that make competitive advantage more important than ever. Just to tip the scales and focus a little bit more, I guess every dark cloud having a silver lining, no matter what the economy, no matter what competitive environment, there are always businesses who succeed spectacularly, who drive record sales and record profits. And for a bit of inspiration, always look at the fastest growing 100 businesses. Number 2 on that list, Tesserance, a client of ours with 257% growth, which is a phenomenal achievement that we're all very proud of. So a great quote from Jack Welch. He was the former CEO of GE. He's been heralded by many as the greatest leader of his era. He was renowned for saying, if you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete. And it's really interesting comment. And he goes on to talk about too many people go into business and try and compete without a competitive advantage. And he said it's absolutely crazy. They either, some get lucky and succeed. Others are like lambs to the slaughter, which is disastrous for those people. Having a defined strategy ensures that you have the cards stacked in your favour. And in many ways, you're doing business with a tailwind rather than business with a headwind. So having a competitive advantage from Jack Walsh's point of view is absolutely critical in business. So let's jump into looking at 6 strategies of highly competitive companies. So we've looked around the world, identified the most successful businesses from growth, from innovation, from profitability, and identified what are those 6 strategies that make them successful in terms of competitive advantage. So I'll kick off with the first one. What these businesses have is one of the strategies of highly effective companies, they neutralise the 5 forces of competition. So you may have heard of Porter's 5 forces before. It's a tool that is, when used correctly, is a very powerful and effective tool. So I'll take you through those 5 forces of competition. So right at the heart, you have direct head-to-head competition, so rivalry amongst your existing competitors. That's the first and the heart of competitive forces. The second competitive force is the bargaining power of your suppliers. And if you're in service-based businesses, your suppliers under this context are your staff or your employees. In manufacturing, it may be components or parts or raw materials. So the bargaining power of suppliers, how strong is that and how does that affect your ability to succeed in business? Then on the flip side, you have the bargaining power of buyers, so customers and consumers. How much bargaining power do they have and how does that impact on your ability to succeed in business? Then the next force of competition is the threat of new entrants to the marketplace. And we've seen lots of industries and categories disrupted by businesses such as Uber for the taxi industry, Tesla in terms of automotive, even going back in time, Apple disrupted BlackBerry as a new entrant to that category. So how strong is the ability for new companies to enter and affect the ability to compete? And the last competitive force is around the threat of substitutes. So substitutes are not direct competition. They're alternatives that your audience or customers can have in terms of, alternatively in terms of buying your product or service. So for example, on Father's Day, a drill is a substitute for a necktie. Or in business, Zoom subscription is a substitute for business travel. So they're the 5 key forces that affect competition. And if all of these forces are strong, it makes it virtually impossible to succeed in business and in any market sector, in any category. However, on the flip side, if you work hard to reduce and neutralise each of those 5 forces, the results of growth and profitability can be absolutely profound. Let me use a fantastic example. So Cirque du Soleil is a great case study in competitive strategy, believe it or not, and it applies to business. So Cirque du Soleil grew to an annual revenue of $1 billion pre-pandemic. And think about it, out of an industry, being the circus industry, that was in rapid decline, effectively a dying industry. Not only that, they were able to charge 1,000% premium over and above standard ticket sales. So that's a pretty good outcome given they're in a struggling, declining, dying industry, and to justify and sustain a price premium of at least 1,000%. So let's look at how they use the 5 forces of competition to create a really successful business model. So focusing in on the heart, they managed to reduce the competitive pressure against their direct competitors by being completely different. They created a completely different offer. They developed a clear and compelling value proposition, and they created what we call a blue ocean. So they almost created a category of their own, which meant they had no competition. In terms of bargaining power of their suppliers, and this was an absolute stroke of genius. They replaced the rare and draw card acts, so the bearded lady and the sword swallower and the lion tamer, who could pretty much name their price because they're in high demand and scarcity. So they replaced them with what we call faceless performers, which allowed them to tap into a global pool of gymnasts. They also leveraged the virtuous cycle of success. So as Cirque du Soleil became ubiquitous and successful and aspirational, then all of these gymnasts from around the world were just desperate to work at Cirque du Soleil, so therefore reducing their bargaining power. They reduced the bargaining power of buyers, of consumers and customers by, firstly, in another stroke of genius, instead of targeting kids and young families, they targeted affluent adults. Big game changer. They created a refined theatre environment to make it desirable. They curated the things that that audience loved and cut the things they didn't like. And they leveraged the law of scarcity. So because that offer was so unique and so aligned and you couldn't get it anywhere else, they could again charge whatever they wanted. They neutralised the force of competition, of new entrants, and this was great through a distinctive offer which was delivered across every aspect of the product experience. They delivered that consistently across all aspects and over time. And they leveraged the power of scale and ubiquity. So making them in every state, in every country, and having multiple performances across the year meant that it was virtually impossible for competitors to break in. A bit like the way Starbucks have a cafe on every single corner, it blocks competition. And the last one, they neutralise the threat of substitutes by pretty much matching all of the best bits of the substitutes. So theatre, movies, concerts, and even other circus were all potential substitutes. And they grabbed and borrowed the best bits of theatre, movies, and concerts. So that's how they managed to neutralise the forces of competition, and the results were immediate, well, relatively immediate. So over a short period of time, they scaled quite significantly. And as I mentioned earlier, they managed to become a $1 billion business, which is, again, no mean feat. So great success story, and you can see the brilliance across each of those aspects of the experience. Okay, the second thing that highly competitive companies have in common is that they drive differentiation. And great quote from Michael Porter, the worst error in strategy is to compete with rivals on the same dimension. So we give you an example. 3 shirts, they look the same, they have the same kind of attributes, 100% cotton, slim fit design, same country of origin in terms of made in Italy. But the one on the left is $190, the one in the middle is $100, and the one on the right is $150. So which one would you choose? It's a bit of a no-brainer. I think most people would pick the one in the middle because all things are equal. So it's the same in business. If your product, your service is exactly the same as every other one in the categories, all your competitors, consumers and customers will choose the cheapest one. And then it's a race to the bottom, which is not a good strategy at all. And it's very common. So being different creates a strong and sustainable competitive advantage. And this is an absolutely fantastic example. So anyone who's got an espresso machine, I've got one at home, one at work, I'm a massive advocate. It's a great example. Whilst there's nothing new about coffee, it's quite similar. Everything else that they did was a game changer, was completely different to anything in the marketplace. The first thing is delivering coffee in individual pods was fantastic, counterintuitive because of cost and packaging and maybe some inefficiencies, but it delivered freshness to the consumer and it was different. 26 different flavours individually portioned, hadn't been done before, was counterintuitive from an efficiency and economic point of view, but was completely different. The machines were completely different to anything that was seen on the marketplace, and selling through a small number of high-end kind of luxury premium boutiques, considering that Nestle's core business is selling through main grocery channels, was a complete game changer. So it was an amazing example of using differentiation across every part of the experience. And again, they enjoyed the results of that brave, counterintuitive strategy. The first thing is within 2010 and 2013, once they consolidated the strategy, they had 40% compound annual growth rate, which is phenomenal. I mean, who in business wouldn't want to see their end-of-year charts looking like that? They've been able to sustain that over the longer time, which is a sign of a really good competitive strategy. And they enjoyed across 21 and 22, they enjoyed the benefits of the working from home where people required better quality coffee at home. So a phenomenal business model based on the foundations of differentiation being the key. And Tesla's another great example. So again, a disruptor in the category. Parts of the product are quite different to anything else in the marketplace. But I think one of the game changers was picking up the dealership and putting it into shopping centres like Chadstone. Makes sense in hindsight, but an absolute game changer in terms of the point of difference. And again, their results speak for themselves. All right, so the third strategy that highly effective companies use is a narrow focus. Now, in business, generally when competition's tough, times are tough, we tend to be very expansive in our thinking. We think we need to market to more consumers, more market sectors. Let's expand our products and so sell more products to more people, more geographic locations. We tend to go more. But counterintuitive again, but the complete opposite is true. The more narrow our focus, then the more cut through we get, the more resonance we get with our target audience. Another quote from Michael Porter, if you try to be all things to all people, you will be nothing to nobody. And I love this one. He talks about the essence of strategy is actually choosing what not to do. Again, we tend to create long lists of things that we need to do. Let's keep adding this. But the more effective strategy that businesses use is to narrow down that focus and say, let's just do those 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 things well. So it's a really effective strategy. Another example that you can probably all relate to is the old newsagent. So the newsagent, I know firsthand through a friend's parents, is a tough gig. Long hours, very small margins. And one of the things that they've fallen into the trap, pretty much every one of them, is when times are tough, competition is tough, expansive in thinking, offering all things to all people. Some of the things they sell through newsagents are extreme. So I know it was tough to begin with, and then when big box category killer came in, Officeworks, effectively it's the all things to all people on steroids. So you would be forgiven for thinking it would be insane to want to enter into the newsagent category knowing that it's what's called a red ocean. It's an absolute bloodbath of competition. But if you had a competitive advantage, you would go in and actually capitalise on that market sector. And that's exactly what two very clever retailers did. So Peter Porswang and Jade Porswang in 2003 had the idea of focusing on one very specific target audience, being teenage girls. They expanded to a secondary audience of teenage boys and built an incredibly successful business, again, focusing on that one very specific audience. And what's really interesting is that consumers travel past dozens of news agencies, past dozens of Officeworks stores to willingly pay a significant premium for products based on this retail proposition. So within a very short space of time, within 6 years, they grew to over 95 locations when other news agencies are closing down. And they sold for $30 million plus undisclosed bonuses to the Just Group. And now I understand that it's one of their most profitable and successful businesses, many years later. So a really clever local example of how having a very narrow focus can actually drive cut through and growth in really competitive categories. All right, so the fourth strategy of highly effective companies is a distinctive value proposition. A number of you may be familiar with this, but just as a nice refresher, there are 3 key foundations to define when developing the value proposition. So the first one, as we've just spoken about, is defining that target audience, that customer. What end user are we focusing on? What are the demographics, geography, those key factors? Then understanding, and again, the more narrow you can get with that focus, it becomes more intuitive and easy to understand what are the core needs that drive their purchasing behaviour. What products are they desperately wanting? What are the rational needs, the emotional needs, and what's becoming more important, what are the social needs that are going to drive their decision-making process? And the third pillar is around what relative price positioning are we going to leverage. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but is it low cost, is it premium differentiated, or is it price parity? So those 3 pillars are really important in terms of defining our value proposition. And a great strategy that they use is to put that into a value proposition statement. And I've got a couple of examples. So Smiggle, for image-conscious teenagers being their target audience, who want to look cool and not take life too seriously, being the key purchase driver. Smiggle provides fashionable, fun, colourful and creative stationery, and they were absolutely focused on delivering this at premium price points. So they used those three key pillars very effectively. And Nespresso, for affluent coffee connoisseurs who want the perfect coffee at home every time. Nespresso provides quality, cafe quality coffee at home with ease from quality designer machines at premium price points. So this is how these two businesses have developed a value proposition statement. So the fifth strategy of highly effective companies is to drive a wedge between the costs incurred to create your product or deliver your product or service and the willingness of the market to pay for it. So getting pricing strategy right is often overlooked, often missed, but it's such an important part of competitive strategy and success in business. And in many ways, the good news is, in the complexity of world and business, there's really only two pricing strategies that you need to consider. A little bit of 101. In any business, you've got the cost incurred to deliver your product or service. Then you have the willingness of the market to pay. So it's not costs plus margin equals your sell price. You really think about there's a ceiling to what the market will pay for that product or service. Now, success comes from driving the biggest wedge between costs incurred and what the market will pay. Simple as that. Now, in terms of the two ways that you can do that, the first way is through what we call successful differentiated strategy or premium pricing. Now, the objective here is to drive up willingness to pay as high as you can. So develop all the strategies and reasons for consumers to happily, willingly pay a significant premium. And driving the wedge, the biggest wedge in there, is what defines the degree of success. And we've seen a number of businesses do this extremely well. Apple is one of them. They spend so much time and effort creating desire and desperation for people to want that product that will even queue up for days, that they can literally drive up willingness to pay well beyond the cost incurred to develop the product. It's a really good competitive strategy. So the second strategy is called successful low cost. And this is where, when, I guess, in discounting, where the market's willingness to pay is a little lower, you ruthlessly drive down costs incurred across your whole supply chain. And the objective there is to drive the biggest wedge between those two things. And globally, Walmart are the absolute masters of this. I've got an example if you want to reach out on how they go through their value chain to drive down costs incurred. And locally, JB Hi-Fi are also masters in this particular strategy. Now, sounds really simple, but where most businesses that we see come unstuck is in this last column of what I call disaster. So in business, there's lots of pressure from the market that always pushes down on price. I mean, the market always pushes down on price. And with small businesses, and particularly privately run businesses, there's two principles that mean that costs are usually a little bit higher, or we don't compromise on cost. One is the belief that if we create the best product in the marketplace, that we will succeed. Now, that comes at a cost. And the second thing is that pride. Pride drives the fact that we don't want to compromise on costs. So what tends to happen is costs are higher than the average, willingness to pay is pushed down, and if we're very lucky, we're left with the thinnest slither of profitability. So it's really important, and this is where we've seen the biggest game changer for businesses that we've worked with, to say, pick one of those two, premium or low cost, and double down on it. Be 100% focused. If it's successful, differentiated, think of every single way to drive up willingness to pay. Aspiration, desire, law of scarcity, that's one of the key drivers. If you choose successful low cost, you have to be focused and ruthless across your whole value chain to deliver low cost. And the success of focusing on those strategies pays off hugely. So JB Hi-Fi, record sales and profits. And Apple reported this year the $3 trillion market value. So, and look at that growth in what you would consider a very mature and saturated market. All right, so the last strategy of highly effective companies is around supporting and reinforcing activities. So what they do is create this ecosystem of unique, highly unique and sort of intertwined attributes that create a really strong proposition. And I'll use IKEA as an example. I think everyone can relate to IKEA because everyone's bought something from IKEA, and there's like a billion bookcases out there in the marketplace. So IKEA is a hugely successful business, world's largest furniture retailer, 783 million visitors per annum. Who wouldn't want those if you're in retail? $37.6 billion in revenue per annum, 8% year-on-year growth. It's been as much as 10%. Prior to passing away a year before last, Ingvar, a privately run business, had a $40 billion net worth. Again, who wouldn't want that, or at least one decimal point behind, making him the 10th richest man in the world. So a hugely successful business. And what I find really interesting is when most of us think of IKEA and IKEA furniture, this is what comes to mind, or divorce if you try to put it together with your wife or partner. So how is it that a business that creates a product that most of us think is a bit ordinary become a global, successful, profitable business? So think about all of the furniture craftsmen out there who, generations of craftsmanship who use quality materials, provide lifetime guarantees, who on Saturday and Sunday have tumbleweeds and crickets through their store. And IKEA has traffic like Bourke Street Mall pre-pandemic. So their value proposition was very clearly defined for young, first-time or price-sensitive buyers who want a funky home on a shoestring budget. IKEA provides stylish, space-efficient and scalable furniture and accessories at very low price points. So how they used interconnecting, an ecosystem of interconnecting aspects to create a really strong, compelling competitive proposition, delivering modern designs at low cost, instantly with no waiting as the key pillars. Lots of interconnecting activities. So across modern design, they hero their designers. They have an in-house design team. They name their products with quirky Swedish names. They've approached a kind of seasonal product range, a bit like how fashion works rather than traditional furniture. Strong focus on MPD. In terms of low cost, self-assembled, self-selected, flat-packed, extensive inventory on site. And again, no waiting, it's all on site, it's flat-packed, it's got large displays. So what's really interesting is this, when you think of the success of IKEA over the decades that they've been in Australia, I always wonder, well, it can't be that hard to replicate. Why isn't there another IKEA? Why are there two others that are doing the same thing? They've managed to block competition for decades and own that space. It's this interconnecting ecosystem of unique and distinctive attributes. And the more of these attributes, the stronger your competitive barrier. And again, those unique attributes, that ecosystem has created that distinctive IKEA experience that I think we all love occasionally. And their success and their growth has been phenomenal. So think about the journey in any retailers online. Think about the tough battle that a lot of retailers have had over the last decade, and look at IKEA with a really strong competitive strategy, has really bucked that trend and grown consistently and strongly despite all those economic conditions. So a phenomenal success story. So I could talk about this all day, but I only have 30 minutes. So to wrap up on those key strategies, so the 6 strategies of highly competitive companies, the first thing they do, neutralise those 5 forces of competition. And it's a very powerful tool when used correctly. And we can definitely help in that space. We've helped a number of businesses in that area. The second strategy is they drive differentiation. And I can't emphasise this enough, that if you were the same as every other business, it'll be a race to the bottom in terms of price. Find as many ways as possible to be unique or differentiated from the marketplace, from your competitors. It can be challenging, but it's really important. The third strategy is having a very narrow focus. And this is always the tough one because, again, it's expansive thinking when times are tough. Counterintuitive, narrow your focus, be really clear about your target audience, and less is more in that particular space. The fourth strategy is to have that distinctive value proposition. So again, bringing it together, leveraging those three key attributes: clarity around the target audience, understanding their purchase drivers, their needs and wants, and be clear about the price positioning. Being the fifth point, drive the biggest wedge between costs incurred and willingness to pay, and be absolutely clear, focused and ruthless around premium pricing and driving up willingness to pay as your absolute daily focus. Or if you do take the path of low cost, which is a word of caution, very difficult in Australia unless you've got major buying advantage in terms of volume, is to be ruthless about your whole value chain and cutting costs at every key part. And the sixth strategy is about the power of having those supporting and reinforcing activities, create that ecosystem. And this stage can be really fun, looking at all of those unique aspects that all intertwine to create this unique, distinctive, and highly competitive strategy for the business. So that is the presentation on competitive advantage. We have time now to go to the room and ask and answer some questions. If I can quickly find the questions in here. All right, so Kim has asked, did Smiggle leave getting out of their strategy? Did Smiggle leave gifting out of their strategy? It really is a solution to the problem. What do I buy a teen for their birthday, Christmas, etc.? No, gifting was a key part of the strategy. And I guess I know as a consumer myself, when the kids were young, I think we spent a big chunk of our salary at Smiggle contributing to their growth. And it was generally when there was a kids' party, the go-to was always jump in the car, drive to Smiggle, past probably 25 news agencies, and pay that crazy premium without actually questioning it, because we knew that kids would love it. It was targeted specifically to the needs of that very specific audience. And then it created that virtuous cycle that because kids loved it, kids wanted it, and people were buying it for them, then it became almost ubiquitous. Every, I was going to say lunchbox, every pencil case was a Smiggle pencil case, and therefore kids that didn't have a Smiggle pencil case would want one, and therefore that perpetuates that market, which is absolutely fantastic. And Sarah has said, lovely to see you, Grant. Thank you. Does anyone else have some questions? I just need to open up that little question box a bit more. Any questions, anything about competitive advantage? Thank you very much. How often do I revive, someone's put typo in there, supposed to say my strategy, I think. So review my strategy. So strategy should be reviewed, look, I think every year. It doesn't mean a wholesale change, but if you think about things change in industry, so a new competitor may come in that totally changes the center of gravity of the competitive environment. Your business may change, products may change, technology change, consumers change. We've seen one of the biggest shifts in consumer power over the last 5 years, so millennials being the main consumer, 1 in 3 purchase dollars, and that changes the whole ballgame. So you definitely need to review every year. Best, unless you need to, is try and keep it consistent for as many years as possible, because consistency over time creates a very strong competitive strategy. So I think the principle is do it right, do it thoroughly at the beginning, and then try and keep it consistent over time. Definitely review and see if any little aspects need to change. Rob has asked, thank you, Rob, services versus products, any different thinking? Look, down into the detail, every company, every category will have its nuances and points of difference. The principles I've tried to cover across the case studies and examples, the strategies are the same across each of these. The nuances of delivery will be quite different. So again, every company are competing with other companies for consumer dollar. That's the same principle across every single business. And the more successful you are at competing, then the more successful you're going to be. So the principles are pretty much the same across each business. We have Lisa, thank you. Hey, Grant, I work with a food manufacturer who is exactly at the disaster between costs incurred and willingness to pay, and I see it all the time. They're serving the aged care market. It's tough to drive prices up. What's your advice with this one? Refined target market, higher premium aged care facilities. So thanks, Lisa. Yes, you have touched on a couple. Definitely look at the marketplace. Look at one targeting a sector who will more happily pay a premium, and then look at products and services that hopefully buyers can't get anywhere else, which therefore enables you to lift the costs and charge a premium. If you look at the marketplace and say, well, no matter what we do, we'll never be able to drive up willingness to pay because the key driver of our buyer is about low cost, then you have to jump into the low-cost model and be ruthless and diligent at looking at your whole value chain and looking at where you can streamline, strip costs that are unnecessary to deliver a profit at low cost. One thing I didn't have time to mention is the only way that you can have a foot in each camp is under different companies or different brands. And a fantastic example is Jetstar. Jetstar and Qantas. So Qantas were in a wonderful position where they had almost market domination once Ansett dropped out of the marketplace, until the threat of Virgin Air were to come in. And Virgin were renowned for cutting costs, taking in low. So Qantas, in their infinite wisdom, said, well, if we just drop our price because our costs are high, we'll go broke. Absolutely guaranteed. So they said, what we're going to do is we're going to dial up our premium proposition to the corporate market. So we're going to focus on that market, make it a premium offer. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a diffusion brand where we can build the whole business model on low cost. So you walk out to the plane, so therefore it's cheap. You don't have the walk-on aspect. You're further out, which means it's lower cost. The planes are lower cost, the staff are lower cost. So they were able to build a model that's every single aspect is low cost. Hugely successful strategy. They managed to pretty much squash Virgin out of the market. And Richard Branson was renowned for saying, the only way to become a millionaire out of the airline industry is to start off as a billionaire. So they got squashed out of the marketplace. A very clever strategy from Alan Joyce at the time. And I think... so Michael has asked, in the property sector, there's a plethora of development consultants, which is true. Having a narrow focus and a distinctive proposition and possibly drive differentiation. Yeah, hard when you don't know anything about the business. It'd be good to chat, Michael. If we can send me your details, it'd be good to have a chat afterwards, because you're absolutely right that the property and development space has a number of competitive pressures, plethora of other competitors, shrinking wallet of consumers, and again, a number of other factors. It would definitely be worth looking at the 5 forces model and saying, okay, how can we reduce the bargaining power of purchasers? How can we reduce the bargaining power of our suppliers? How can we reduce the bargaining power or the threat of new entrants? And in a boom market, remember, everyone was a property developer. One thing about a tougher economy is it doesn't seem to sort out the mums and dads property developers from the serious property developers. So it does sort out that marketplace. So the economy will help us in that respect. And then also, what are substitutes? And so we can definitely look at some strategies. And it's a great exercise where we brainstorm strategies within each of those spaces. So Nicole has asked, are subscription-based business models beneficial? Absolutely, definitely. The ultimate goal, I believe, is a subscription-based business, because you lock in customers over a period of time, and there's a little bit of... Consumers have, again, infinite number of choices online. So what it does, it sort of locks them in to become less, not impossible to switch, but they're locked in and less prone to be open to switching. So that's one particular thing. There's also a model where, we get busy in life, and a subscription model just is a little bit of set and forget. So without a subscription model, we might say, oh, look, I've run out of my pods for my machine. I normally order them through Nespresso, but you know what? I'm actually at the supermarket. I'll get those cheaper Aldi ones, and then all of a sudden Nespresso's lost revenue. Subscription model, it rolls up. I see it as a benefit. I didn't have to think about it. They've locked me in, and they've blocked competition from Aldi and all the other copies. So if you can, and again, it's relevant for some industries and not others, but if you can get a subscription model, it's a fantastic business model, as is bundling. John has asked, at what stage of reviewing a business would you undertake the competitive advantage review? Every stage. I would highly recommend it, even in a lean way with startups, because what it does is it sets the foundation for a strong competitive business at early stages to make sure it's on track, and at maturity stages, because we know the life cycle of businesses can go from maturity and decline very quickly. So at maturity, I think it's critically important to make sure there's a solid, strong competitive strategy to actually hold off the decline. And as we've seen, Apple's 25 or 30-year journey goes product maturity decline, then they introduce a new product, maturity decline. They ride the wave of these new products and never fall into the trap of product decline, taking their business down. And let me just see. So I think that's all we have in terms of questions. Again, my email address is there, always open. Any questions, feel free just to reach out. This was sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of competitive strategy. A couple of things quickly that we do is we can run competitive strategy analysis. So this can be done over 2 to 3 hours. Just do a quick diagnosis of your business and help to see where some of the issues and opportunities are in terms of your competitive strategy. A good fun one is 5 Forces workshop. So we literally across half day, let's say, we can take your business through the 5 forces of competition, and that has been a game changer for some businesses in 5 hours. Then we can do much more detailed competitive advantage programs. We do an intuitive 1 day, a much more in-depth 2 day, and then we do an advanced 3 day plus some consumer research. So again, that's how we can help. Hope it's been helpful, and there's been some great insights that can help transform your business. So I will sign out, and I hope you all stay well, and look forward to hearing from you.